You know, the celebrities and the politicians who are presumably saying, people like Kamala Harris and Biden who are tweeting about this and are presumably saying that there's a miscarriage of justice because the cops were not indicted for doing their job. And that doesn't make any sense. Why are you trying to prosecute individuals for carrying out the law that you've created? Change the law if you
Right.
don't want this to happen. Um,
Right. And
it's almost like, well, we talked to Gabe last night, who these are Christians who were arrested for not following the mask ordinance of their local community. My problem is not with the police officers, although I do know that police officers have discretion, and I think that police officers should say, well, hey, if I think this law violates the Constitution, am I more beholden to the mayor and this edict, or am I beholden to the people? I think they should ask themselves that question. But at the end of the day, they're doing their job. My problem is with the mask mandates.
yes,
You know,
although I will say, I agree. If you don't like the system, it's the laws that need to change, which is my point, right? But I don't think that officers are moral. They're still morally culpable for carrying out immoral laws. So an extreme example is uh, officers that, and I know a lot of people disagree, but officers that enforce drug laws with their own force are culpable for enforcing laws that shouldn't be on the books. One that maybe people will agree with is officers that enforce mask ordinances are culpable for choosing to enforce mask ordinances. Like, now, are they the only ones culpable? No. You should not have a society in which there's a law, but you're only going to get mad at the guys who enforce it. Like, no. If you don't want them to enforce it, are they morally culpable? Yes. Are they the problem? Not really. They're not the main problem. The problem is the law in and of itself. Um, so that's what needs to change. And this is the reason I put up the word enforcement here is another word for cops is law enforcement officers. They enforce the law. So law enforcement is only as moral as the law. If the law is
yeah,
immoral, then law enforcement is enforcing immorality. That's what they're doing.
yeah. So
So
somebody in chat just said, Carrie, they were just doing their jobs. I see. Sounds familiar. I replied, yeah, it's a moral problem. That's why I said ethically, I have a question for those cops personally.
right.
But all I can do, there's no legal recourse for me to go after a cop for doing something that is legal.
Yes. Yes. It's
Ethically
legal.
and
It might be wrong,
morally,
but it's legal.
right. It might be
Yes.
wrong, but it's legal. Ethically and morally, I can hope they choose something different, but I can't expect to use the law to prosecute them when what they did was within the law.
Right.
So if I have a problem with the law, then fix the law. Like you just said, they're only going to be as moral as the law is.
Right.
So
Right.
duh,
Yeah, and
Nemo.
it's also like what kind of
Sorry.
people like I don't know how you expect to run a government in which you put laws on the books telling cops these are the things you can do and you must do to enforce the laws, and then when they do them and things don't go well, you're like, yeah, well, you can't do the things that we told you had to do. It's like, all right, well, I don't know. You're just gonna get thugs who just want to like. You're not gonna get good police officers for that anyway. Um, but
Well, and somebody else points out a distinction about mask mandates are not law, which brings up another good point. Mask mandates, if we're talking
yeah,
about mask mandates, that you're right, that is not a law. And I do believe that these mandates, these edicts that are coming down from local officials are,
why are
I
mask
believe,
mandates not law?
they're not law.
Why?
It's not a legislative body creating
Legislative
these.
bodies have granted power to bureaucracies to pass regulations that are enforced with as laws. Like that's what laws are. They're laws.
Really?
Yeah, I mean that's like saying like, well, I violated this EPA regulation and now I have to go to jail. It's like, well, it's not the law. Well, it kind of is. Congress passed legislation granting power
Because
to do that.
they gave power, but Congress is supposed to write the laws. But they've given power
They give, yeah,
to
welcome to the deep state.
bureaucracies. Yeah.
Right. Like, yes, they've empowered entire bureaucracies to have rules and enforce them. And the Department of Agriculture agents can carry guns. Why? Because there's rules and they get to enforce the rules. Like, that's how this works, people. When you empower a bureaucracy to make rules, those rules are laws by extension. I mean, are they constitutional? Absolutely not. I do think they are illegal, but they're not unlawful. They meet
Well,
some law,
somebody
right?
Well, somebody else in chat says regulations are not law. Well, yeah, that's how I've always thought of it. It's not a law. And like the person says in New Mexico, or
I
I
mean,
forget, it's moving too fast, but somebody said their governor did the mask mandate. It's just one person deciding. No one votes on it. It's a regulation, but you're saying it's being treated as a law.
okay, then define law. If you violate the regulation, you go to jail. You violate the
Right.
law, you go to jail. What's the fucking difference between regulation and law? Like, I don't know what this means.
I guess I'm saying there should be a distinction, but we're not treating them
No, there
differently.
shouldn't be a distinction. What would a regulation
Like,
mean if it weren't enforceable?
I think there's something. I guess I just go back to law was supposed to be created by elected officials that vote. It's not
Regulations
supposed to
are they
be
are they have outsourced their. They've said here, agency X, we want you to do A, B, and C. Whatever rules you want, write them as long as they meet these guidelines. Those become law. That's the law, right? I mean, a lawyer will take you if you violate those regulations. A lawyer can take you to a United States court, and you can lose and go to jail for violation of those regulations because those regulations are based on law such and such that empowered the FCC to do blah 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 whatever it is. Like that's how the law works, right? So I don't see a like there's a distinction without a difference. Like
Mhm.
I get it. Regulations are worse in the sense that I mean, I hate regulations too, don't get me wrong, and I don't like that Congress outsources their power, but they have. And so regulations are worse because there can be reams and reams and reams of them and no one's paying attention to what the hell the regulators are doing and like they can change them willy-nilly at any moment and there's very little oversight and so like yeah, but that's the system that apparently we voted for. I mean, you know, every time you want a new regulation, that's what you're asking. So look, I think you could challenge the validity of some of these mask mandates. I think probably health officials and mayors and governors are trying to see what they can get away with according to the powers vested in them by their state legislatures. Like, oh, I think we have the power to mandate masks. Like, let's try that. Like, maybe they'll lose. Maybe you could take them to court, and it turns out some of these mask mandates are not legal lawful according to the law of the state. But I think many of them are. There's a lot of emergency power crap that's granted everywhere because people always use, especially statists, they love using emergency examples as like, well, what if there's a zombie apocalypse? You definitely want the mayor to be able to violate all your rights then, don't you? And everyone's like, well,
Right.
yes, obviously in a zombie apocalypse. So they write, right? So then they write like, well, in emergencies, and then it's like, okay, well now what does emergency mean?
Well,
Pandemic,
who
COVID,
determines?
right?
Yeah, that's actually not to go on too much of a tangent, but that's been something I've been thinking about recently because I'm not sure what my criteria is for when I think that they should be able to violate my rights. And for some of the friends I have who disagree with me on mask mandates, I had a friend who agrees with the mask mandates, and I was trying to get to what is the root of our disagreement, like and I think the root of our disagreement is that her criteria for when the government should be able to violate your constitutional rights is her threshold is lower than mine because
Right, right.
the coronavirus doesn't meet my criteria. But
But a zombie apocalypse might.
yeah, and I don't know where that line is for me,
Right,
and
right,
I don't know how to be. I've thought about it a lot because I don't want it to be just an emotional gut reaction.
right.
I don't want my opinion to be based solely on gut reaction. It's hard for me to. I haven't threaded out yet, I guess, where that line is for me and why.
Well, someday I'll pull you to the dark side, and you'll decide never.
And that's intellectually consistent. That's easier because you just say they should never be able to,
They should
even in
never
a
do that.
even in a zombie apocalypse.
Even in a zombie apocalypse. Never. It is easier. I'll admit that. It's much easier. Um, but yeah, so uh, anyway, the Breonna Taylor stuff, I someone mentioned this the other day. I don't remember where. Keith might remember where. It might have been in one of our in the comments somewhere, but maybe even it was Keith that mentioned. I don't remember. Uh, it's weird that people are not. It's not weird. It's telling that people are not protesting the root cause of some of these things, right? These aren't mass protests for ending the war on drugs, for example, and mass incarceration. Like, they're not really making those arguments. They're picking on specific instances of sometimes bad behavior, sometimes just ambiguous behavior or unfortunate circumstances that actually aren't bad behavior in some cases. And they're picking on these and saying that the cops are racist and blah, 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 and it needs to be reformed. But they're not. Like, if social justice were a thing, which obviously I don't believe it is, like social justice is a corruption of the term justice, but if you cared about, let's say, people of color, in quotes, being treated unjustly, you would look at the incarceration rates in the United States and you would say, oh, we have more people in prison than anyone else in the world. And a lot of those people are there for nonviolent drug laws, and a lot of those people are black. Maybe that's what we should be arguing against. Maybe our protests, maybe instead of pussy hats, we should be going to Washington and protesting the war on drugs. But they're not. They're not doing any of that stuff. They're protesting because I don't think they want to end the war on drugs, because the war on drugs has enabled a massive apparatus of police surveillance and police state tactics. I mean, the war on drugs is why crappy little police departments can buy, huge armored vehicles and fun toys to go blow crap up with. I mean, the war on drugs enables a lot of fun
But
SWAT
here,
stuff.
but here you're getting to the root of the problem, which is that
Right.
when you say they don't really want to end the war on drugs because the war on drugs has enabled this mass surveillance and all
They
of
want
these,
the mass
given all
surveillance.
these
They just want
powers.
control of it. Yeah.
But wait, let me finish. They, what does they mean? Here's the problem. They means, I think, the deep state, the elite, the powers that be. They don't want to end the war on drugs, but all of these puppets in the streets, these puppets at the BLM protests and the pussy hat protests and whatever, those puppets, if you were to say to them, you're not protesting against the war on drugs because you don't want to end the war on drugs because it's created a mass surveillance state, they would argue and say, no, I'm against mass surveillance. That's because they're puppets. They don't realize the only reason they're in the street protesting and rioting is because someone is pulling their strings to do so, and they're not self-aware and conscious enough to even, if you were to ask people, why are you out disrupting random people who are having dinner? Why are you interrupting their dinner and turning over tables and water glasses and telling them to put up the BLM fist? They can't get past the talking points they've been programmed with by their masters. This is a modern day form of mental slavery. You are slaves to the system. You're out there. You're not out there protesting anything that's going to make any of the things you claim. You think you're out there on behalf of marginalized communities and against systemic injustice. And no, you're out in the streets on behalf of the people, on behalf of the powerful people who want to continue mass surveillance, who want to continue controlling us. Like, you're part of the system and you're so blind, and you don't take a second to step outside of yourself and deeply think about what it is that you believe in, and investigate where the real injustice is coming from. These people don't do anything other than receive opinions and instructions, and then they're such zombies. They're not autonomous enough to even realize that these are not your motivations, that and these are not the behaviors you're being programmed with are not your own conscious decisions. You're puppets.
Yeah, but yes, they are. But that's because we have puppet factories, and we've had
Yeah.
puppet factories for decades. Like, that's what you get, right? When you turn your education system into a puppet factory, you don't be surprised when you get puppets at the end. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's because that's what we built. We built puppets, and there's
I've
a.
seen videos of,
Go ahead.
just real last final point. I've seen videos of the unrest. I'm sure we're going to talk about it in Louisville and some of the other cities. And I'm watching these people just mass chaos, throwing stuff at projectiles at police, overturning tables and running through the streets. And I'm watching this thinking, how sad that you're not in control. You've given up your agency, that you're just a puppet on a string who can't get past I've already said this, but you can't get past the talking points you've been programmed with. You can't have a serious, deep conversation with anyone, even the people who agree with you. I doubt you can have a deep conversation about your motivations and what you think the end results are going to be.
I'm sure I'll get crucified for this metaphor, Carrie, but they're like packs of wild animals, and the leaders know where to throw the meat and how to get them to just go tear some crap down. Like that's
Well, yeah, like in a video game, it's the NPC metaphor.
Yeah,
I've been playing Far Cry 4 lately. It's like when I throw bait and then I send the NPC animals after the bait instead of after me.
Yeah.
It's like throw the bait, go over there, do this, tear all this down, destroy your own communities.
Yep.
Get rid of the police, which 80% of people don't want, but go ahead and do wreak all of this havoc. And while you're doing it, we're going to program you with the false belief that you're part of the resistance.
Right. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. I've said this before, but I do want to make this point. If you want to if you actually want to be part of the resistance, there's a metaphorical gun in the room. There's a gun, government's gun, controlling people's lives, having all this regulation and laws. If you want to resist, you resist the existence of the gun in the room. You say, no one should have this power. Instead, what they are doing is they want to wrestle control of the gun for themselves. I think this is why you never hear them. Let's just think about wars on some abstract things, because those are my favorite. Wars on abstract concepts are the best because they never end. The war on poverty. Poverty's gotten worse. War on drugs. Drugs have gotten worse. War on terror. I don't know if it's gotten worse, but it certainly hasn't gone away. Our liberties have gotten worse for all three of those. They're not out saying, let's end these things. Let's dismantle the police state apparatus. They're out there saying, like, no, we want control. When they say defund the police, what they mean is we want control over all those cool toys that the police got. We want control over them, and we want the power to do our thing. Not just, we don't like the thing they're doing. And someone in chat mentioned asset forfeiture laws. We don't have to get into those, but they're another one that's just cops use them. Police departments use them across the country. They're one of the most abhorrent forms of theft imaginable. I mean, they're worse than taxes in terms of their like principled violation of property rights. They're horrible. Maybe not worse than taxes. That's hard, but they're really, really bad. And asset forfeiture is something that police departments use to subsidize their toy budget so they can go buy more crap. We definitely have gone are the days of Andy Griffith, right? We have our police departments in major cities look like military units in other parts of the world. And that should scare you. By the way, Elvac in chat says, if you haven't, you should look into Harry Anslinger. Anyone who hasn't looked into Harry Anslinger should look into Harry Anslinger. He's the father of the war on drugs. He's a horrible racist, like crazy, like overt racist, horrible human being. But there you go. War on drugs.
Well, to your point about the war on abstract things, I mean, look at what social justice warriors claim to be fighting. And social justice has become so predominant, so dominant culturally now. And they claim to be fighting the war on racism and sexism, right? What have they done? They've increased racism and sexism. Right. They're actively making this a more racist and sexist country.
Right, just like the war on poverty.
Yeah.
Poverty, I don't know if anyone knows, but just have on the side, poverty in the United States had been declining steadily and got dangerously low for the people in the state who like poverty. So they needed to enact the war on poverty, and it's gone up ever since. So, and what's the solution? Oh, well, we're not doing enough. The war on poverty, we're not doing enough for the war on poverty. So we need to do more of the thing that we did that started to make it worse.